She opened the text message, expecting a dinner invitation. It was an eviction notice. Her daughter was forcing her to move to the garage apartment she once used for storage. The master bedroom legally repurposed. The 4 walls she'd painted herself while on leave between deployments. Evidence of a family fracturing beyond repair. "You need to make room for our growing family," her daughter told her coldly. "The garage has everything you need now." Now Victoria would claim the right to reclaim her dignity. And across town, Sergeant James asked, can she really do that? But Cassandra already had. The first thing Victoria noticed was the absence of photographs. Not just a few missing frames, but a deliberate erasure of her existence in the home she had purchased after her 3rd tour of duty. The hallway where her service portraits once hung now displayed Cassandra's wedding photos and her husband Derek's business achievements. The Medal of Honor that Victoria had received for pulling 3 wounded soldiers to safety under heavy fire, gone, likely boxed away with other unnecessary decorations. Victoria stepped forward slowly, her prosthetic leg making a soft thud against the hardwood floors she'd installed herself 5 years ago. The afternoon sun streamed through windows she'd replaced after the hurricane of 2017, casting long shadows that stretched toward her like reaching hands. The master bedroom, her bedroom, was unrecognizable. Her military neat queen bed replaced by a king-sized monstrosity with decorative pillows that served no purpose. The walls, once painted a serene blue that reminded her of the Afghan sky at dawn, now covered in a trendy gray that matched nothing but Cassandra's cold demeanor. And where Victoria's antique writing desk had sat, passed down through 3 generations of Rodriguez women, now stood a changing table with cartoon giraffes dancing along its edges. She didn't speak at first. Her hand gripped the doorframe, steadying herself against memories more painful than any physical wound she'd endured. Cassandra's voice floated in from behind. "Oh, you're back early," she said brightly, walking in with shopping bags bulging with baby clothes and diaper packages. "Derek, I thought you'd be at your VA appointment until 4. The doctor had a cancellation. Victoria turned slowly. Her son-in-law wasn't far behind, carrying a new baby monitor still in its packaging. His eyes darted toward Victoria, then away, a soldier retreating from an engagement he hadn't planned for. "We've been busy setting up," Cassandra continued, her voice artificially cheerful. "With the twins coming in just 2 months, we needed to maximize our space. You'll be more comfortable in the garage anyway." "It's all fixed up," Derek added weakly, trying to sound helpful. "We put in that mini fridge you wanted last year, and the bathroom's functional now. Better privacy, you know." Victoria's mouth formed something resembling a smile, but her eyes remained as steady and unreadable as they had been during battlefield negotiations. "Of course," she said softly. "Privacy." No one asked how she felt. No one mentioned her distinguished service photographs, her collection of books signed by fellow veterans, the carved wooden box containing letters from soldiers she'd commanded. She wasn't sure if they'd been carefully stored or simply discarded as unnecessary reminders of a past Cassandra had always found difficult to acknowledge. Later that evening, Victoria stood in the garage apartment, inhaling the lingering smell of motor oil and old cardboard. The single bed they'd mentioned was wedged against the far wall, a thin mattress that would do her back no favors. No closet, just a metal rack they'd assembled with plastic connectors that were already straining under the weight of the few clothes they'd moved for her. A single window faced the brick wall of the neighbor's house, offering neither light nor view. The floor was concrete, painted in industrial gray, the kind that would turn ice cold during winter mornings and remain chilled year-round. A small area rug, one Victoria recognized from their previous home, threadbare and faded, had been tossed down as an afterthought, covering barely enough space for her feet to touch when rising from bed. Victoria sat slowly on the edge of the mattress, the springs compressed beneath her weight, the metal frame creaking in protest. She ran her hand along the wall beside her, feeling the unfinished drywall, rough against her calloused fingers. 22 years in the army, 4 tours of duty, and a Silver Star. Yet here she was, relegated to the margins of her own home. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she reached for the small fireproof lockbox she always kept within arm's reach. The combination was simple. 0714, the day she'd received her commission. Inside lay the documents no one had asked her about. The mortgage agreement with only her name listed as owner, the property deed showing her sole ownership, and the USAA insurance policy that covered the home and everything in it. These weren't copies or scans, but the originals, safety sealed in plastic sleeves to protect them from the elements. Victoria had always been methodical about documentation, a habit born from military necessity and reinforced by a lifetime of being underestimated. She traced her name on the deed, remembering the day she'd signed the papers. It had been 3 years after the IED that took her leg, but left her alive when 2 others weren't so fortunate. The VA loan had come through more quickly than expected. Cassandra was finishing college then, Derek not yet in the picture. Victoria had purchased the house thinking of holiday gatherings and, perhaps, someday, grandchildren who would know their grandmother as more than just a photograph in uniform. Now she looked up at the exposed pipes running along the ceiling, copper, veins carrying water and heat to the main house while barely reaching this afterthought of a living space. Somewhere above her, Cassandra laughed at something Derek said. Their footsteps moved across floors Victoria had paid to have refinished after Cassandra's college graduation party had left deep scratches in the wood. She folded the papers carefully, returned them to the lockbox, and secured it beneath the bed where it wouldn't be noticed. If they wanted to forget who had built this home, who had provided the foundation for their comfort, that was their choice. But Victoria Rodriguez, Master Sergeant, U.S. Army, retired, had not forgotten. That night, as Cassandra and Derek arranged stuffed animals in the newly decorated nursery that had once been Victoria's sanctuary, the veteran sat upright on her thin mattress in the garage, her hand resting on her phone. In the quiet, surrounded by boxes labeled mom's stuff in her daughter's hurried handwriting, Victoria whispered, "This isn't the first battle I've fought on unfamiliar ground." All right, before we dive further into this unbelievable story, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. This story about sacrifice, betrayal, and sweet calculated justice is one you won't want to miss a second of. The sound of renovation woke Victoria before sunrise. She sat up in the narrow bed, her back already protesting the cheap mattress, and listened to the rhythmic pounding coming from the main house. Through the thin walls of the garage apartment, she could hear male voices, contractors, not Derek, whose idea of home improvement was calling someone else to handle it. She didn't rush. 22 years of military service had taught her the value of measured responses. By the time she made it through the side door and into the kitchen, the chaos was in full swing. 2 men in paint-splattered coveralls were dismantling the breakfast nook, the cozy corner where Victoria had spent countless mornings helping Cassandra with homework, later with college applications, and most recently, planning her wedding. "What's happening?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded attention on 3 continents. Cassandra appeared from around the corner, designer coffee mug in one hand, smartphone in the other. "Oh, we're expanding the kitchen," she said casually, as if discussing the weather. "The designer said we needed more space for the twins. You weren't using this area anyway." Victoria's gaze swept over the half-dismantled breakfast nook. The built-in bench where she'd installed cushions in Cassandra's favorite shade of teal when she turned 16. The table where they'd celebrated Cassandra's acceptance to college. The corner shelves that had displayed Victoria's collection of mugs from every country she'd been stationed in. "Where are my things?" Victoria asked, searching for any sign of her belongings. Cassandra waved vaguely toward the garage. "I had them put everything in boxes. They're somewhere in there. You can sort through them when you have time." Victoria said nothing. She simply stood there, taking in the scene with the same detached assessment she'd used to evaluate combat zones. One of the workers gave her a half nod as he passed, then disappeared down the hallway with a section of the bench seat. Cassandra was already back on her phone, scrolling through what looked like nursery ideas on Pinterest. "Oh, and we're having a small gathering this weekend. Just a few friends to see the progress on the nursery. Nothing formal." Victoria nodded once, then turned and walked back to the garage apartment. Inside, she found what Cassandra had referred to as boxes, a haphazard collection of plastic, totes, old Amazon shipping containers, and grocery bags. Her entire life, compressed and contained without care or organization. She bent slowly, her prosthetic leg adjusting with a soft hydraulic hiss, and began the process of cataloging what remained of her visible history in the house. In one bag, she found the mugs, 3 of them cracked from careless handling. In another, photo albums with bent corners and a water stain spreading across one cover. The carved box of letters was nowhere to be found. Victoria worked methodically, her face betraying nothing of the storm building inside her. She set aside damaged items, straightened bent frames, and arranged what could be salvaged on the metal shelving unit that served as her new closet, bookshelf, and display case all in one. By midday, Victoria had transformed her corner of the garage into something resembling living quarters rather than storage. The military precision with which she arranged her remaining possessions stood in stark contrast to the chaos of boxes and construction debris Cassandra had left scattered across the concrete floor. She sat at the small folding table that now served as her desk and opened her laptop. The background image, Victoria in uniform standing beside her late husband on the day of his retirement, filled the screen momentarily before she navigated to her banking app. Victoria's fingers moved deliberately across the keyboard. 22. Years of military service, careful investing, and living below her means had left her with resources Cassandra and Derek seemed to have forgotten about. She pulled up her account summary, her military pension, disability benefits, and investment portfolio, all healthy and accessible. Next, she opened a folder labeled Property and reviewed the documents inside. The mortgage statement from Coastal Lending showed only her name. The home insurance listed her as sole owner. The property tax records confirmed what she already knew. This house, every board and nail, belonged to her alone. Victoria had purchased it outright after receiving her disability settlement and life insurance following her husband's passing. She had added Cassandra to the deed on her 25th birthday, a gesture of love and security, but had retained full rights to the property, a detail her daughter had evidently overlooked or chosen to ignore. A notification chimed on her phone. A promotional email from Coastal Lending, refinancing options for homeowners. Victoria stared at it, a plan forming with the same methodical precision she'd once used to coordinate troop movements. That afternoon, while Cassandra supervised the kitchen renovation and Derek was at work, Victoria made a call. "This is Victoria." "Rodriguez," she said quietly into her phone. "I'd like to speak with someone about my mortgage options." The voice on the other end was friendly, professional. "Of course, Ms. Rodriguez. I see your loan was paid in full 3 years ago. Are you looking to take out a new mortgage or a home equity line?" Victoria smiled for the first time that day. "Neither. I'm interested in something more specific." Later, that evening, as Cassandra and Derek discussed paint colors for the expanded kitchen, Victoria sat in the dimly lit garage apartment, carefully reviewing the email she'd received from Coastal Lending. The attached documents laid out exactly what she had requested: information on transferring property ownership, refinancing options, and most importantly, the legal framework for modifying existing living arrangements. She didn't act immediately. Victoria had learned long ago that patience was often the most powerful weapon in any arsenal. Instead, she began building a case, documenting everything with the same attention to detail she'd once used for mission reports. She took photos: the cracked mugs, the bent frames, the water-damaged albums. She recorded the dates and times of construction, the conversations where her input wasn't sought, the decisions made without her knowledge. She created a spreadsheet of her financial contributions to the house, the original purchase, the renovations after the hurricane, the new roof last spring, the property taxes she still paid in full. Each entry was time-stamped, each dollar accounted for. This wasn't revenge, it was reconnaissance. On Saturday, Victoria heard the front door open and close repeatedly as guests arrived for Cassandra's gathering. Laughter floated across the driveway, punctuated by exclamations of delight as the nursery was shown off. Victoria wasn't invited, nor did she expect to be. Instead, she used the time to make another call, this one to her old friend and former JAG officer, Colonel Maya Washington. "They've essentially evicted you from your own property?" Maya's voice was incredulous. "Not officially," Victoria replied. "Just practically." "And your name is still on the deed, as well as hers?" "Yes. I added her as joint tenant with rights of survivorship when she turned 25. A gesture I'm now reconsidering." Maya was silent for a moment. Then, "You're aware you have options, Vic. Legal ones." Victoria's gaze drifted to the small window that faced the main house. Through it, she could see shadows moving across the kitchen, guests being entertained in a home where she was now considered an afterthought. "I'm aware," she said finally. "I'm just determining which option best communicates my position." After she hung up, Victoria opened her laptop once more and composed an email to her financial advisor. The subject line read simply, "Investment opportunity, immediate consultation requested." The sound of heavy rain against the thin garage roof woke Victoria before her alarm. She sat up in the darkness, her military instincts scanning for threats, before her conscious mind fully engaged. Water was seeping in from the corner where the garage door didn't quite seal. A small puddle was forming, inching toward the cardboard boxes containing what remained of her personal library. Victoria moved efficiently despite the ache in her hip where her prosthetic connected. She grabbed towels from her makeshift bathroom and positioned them as a barrier between the advancing water and her belongings. As she worked, she could hear the central heating kick on in the main house, a comfort she no longer enjoyed in her uninsulated space. By the time she had contained the leak, her phone showed 5:14 a.m. Too early to call anyone, but perfect for her morning routine. Victoria changed into workout clothes and began her physical therapy exercises, the same ones she'd done religiously since losing her leg in Afghanistan. The discipline had kept her mobile when doctors had predicted she might never walk unassisted. Again. At 7:30, she heard the main house stirring to life. Cassandra's voice, sharper in the morning, directing Derek about something related to the nursery. Victoria waited until she heard Derek's car back out of the driveway, before making her way into the kitchen for coffee. Cassandra was sitting at the island counter that had replaced Victoria's breakfast nook, scrolling through her phone while absent-mindedly touching her growing belly. She glanced up when Victoria entered but didn't offer a greeting. Victoria moved to the coffee maker, a high-end espresso machine that had replaced her simple drip model, and stood examining it for a moment. "It's different now," Cassandra said without looking up. "Derek's parents got it for us last Christmas." Victoria nodded once and began pressing buttons, grateful for the mechanical aptitude that had made her valuable during deployments. The machine hissed and gurgled, eventually producing something approximating coffee. "The garage is leaking," Victoria said conversationally, as if discussing the weather forecast rather than substandard living conditions. Cassandra sighed. "We'll have Derek look at it this weekend." "Derek isn't a contractor," Victoria remarked, remembering how her son-in-law had struggled to assemble a simple bookshelf last year. "And the leak is getting worse. My things are at risk of water damage." Cassandra's fingers stilled on her phone. "Mom, we're kind of on a budget right now with the twins coming. We can't just call someone for every little thing." Victoria took a slow sip of her coffee. I understand budgets. I raised you on an E5 salary while your father was deployed. She set her mug down carefully. I'll handle it. She was already reaching for her phone when Cassandra stood abruptly. Just don't make any major changes without talking to us first. It's our house too. The words hung in the air between them, a challenge Victoria didn't immediately address. Instead, she simply nodded again and returned to the garage apartment, coffee in hand. Once inside, Victoria pulled up her contact list and made a call to a roofing company she'd used after the hurricane. By 9 a.m., she had scheduled an inspection for later that morning and arranged for an estimator to assess the entire garage structure, not just the leaking section. At 9:15, her phone rang, her financial advisor returning her message from the previous day. Victoria, I got your email. An investment opportunity in real estate? That's right, Michael. I'm looking at acquiring a mortgage. I wasn't aware you were house hunting. The market's competitive right now, but with your credit score and liquid assets, we could position you well for— I'm not looking to buy a new property, Victoria interrupted gently. I want to buy my own mortgage, or rather, the one Cassandra and Derek think they've taken out. There was a brief silence on the line. I'm not sure I follow. Victoria explained the situation concisely, how she had paid off the original mortgage years ago, but discovered that Cassandra and Derek had recently taken out a home equity loan against the property, using Cassandra's status as joint tenant. To secure the financing, they had done so without consulting Victoria, using the funds for their extensive renovations and a new SUV parked in the driveway. They leveraged my home without my knowledge, Victoria concluded. And now they've relegated me to the garage while they remodel. Michael let out a low whistle. I don't even know what to say, Victoria. It's outrageous. It's a tactical mistake, Victoria corrected. One I intend to address. By the time the roofing inspector arrived, Victoria had outlined her plan to Michael and received his reluctant agreement to help. She greeted the inspector warmly and led him to the leaking section of the garage roof. Looks like you've got more than just a small problem here, ma'am, the inspector said, after a thorough examination. The whole structure needs work. Whoever converted this to living space didn't properly insulate or ventilate it. You've got moisture buildup in the walls, and that's going to lead to mold if it hasn't already. Victoria nodded, taking notes on her phone. What would you recommend as a comprehensive solution? The inspector scratched his beard. Honestly, a full renovation if someone's living here. Proper insulation, ventilation, replacing these windows with energy-efficient ones, sealing the garage door area properly or converting it completely. He gestured around the space. This isn't meant to be a living area as it stands. And how much would that cost approximately? He punched some numbers into a tablet. Given current material costs and labor, you're looking at $25,000 to $30,000 for a quality job, maybe more depending on finishes. Victoria didn't flinch at the number. Please send me a detailed estimate, and I'd like to schedule the work as soon as possible. The inspector looked surprised. Usually, people want to think about an investment that size. Victoria smiled faintly. I've had adequate time to consider my living arrangements. After the inspector left, Victoria made another call, this time to Coastal Lending, where she spoke with a loan officer about the home equity line Cassandra and Derek had taken out. She identified herself as the primary property owner and requested detailed information about the loan terms, payment schedule, and current balance. I'm afraid I can't share specifics without the account holder's permission, the officer explained. I understand, Victoria said calmly. Then perhaps you can tell me whether Coastal Lending has a policy regarding loans secured against properties with multiple owners when all owners haven't provided consent. The officer paused. That's a very specific question, Ms. Rodriguez. It's a very specific situation, Victoria replied. By early afternoon, Victoria had spoken with 3 different departments at Coastal Lending and had been promised a call back from their legal team. She had also received the detailed estimate from the roofing company, which included photographs documenting the substandard conversion of the garage into living space. She was reviewing these materials when her phone chimed with a text from Cassandra. Why? Is there a roofing company estimate in my email? $30K? We can't afford that right now. We need to talk. Victoria didn't respond immediately. Instead, she opened her banking app and transferred funds from her investment account to her checking account, enough to cover both the garage renovation and the first phase of her larger plan. When she finally replied to Cassandra, her message was brief. Yes, we should talk. Dinner tonight? Cassandra's response came quickly. Fine. 7 p.m. Victoria spent the rest of the afternoon organizing her documentation and preparing for the evening's conversation. She arranged her evidence methodically. Photographs of her possessions damaged during the move to the garage, the home improvement receipts for work she'd paid for over the years, the property tax statements in her name, and finally, the original deed showing her as primary owner. At 6:55, she walked into the main house, a thin folder tucked under her arm. The dining room had been transformed since Victoria last sat there. The oak table she'd purchased from a fellow veteran's estate sale had been replaced by a glass-topped monstrosity with chrome legs. The chairs, once comfortable Windsor-style wooden seats with cushions Victoria had sewn herself, were now sleek minimalist pieces that looked better suited to a corporate boardroom than a family dinner. Cassandra was setting out takeout containers. When Victoria entered, Thai food from the place down the street that Victoria had introduced them to years ago. Derek was already seated, scrolling through his phone with the distracted air of someone who'd rather be elsewhere. You're early, Cassandra said without looking up. It wasn't an accusation, but it wasn't a welcome either. Victoria placed her folder on the edge of the table and took a seat across from Derek. Punctuality was drilled into me a long time ago. Derek glanced up, offered a weak smile, then returned to his phone. Cassandra finished arranging the food and sat down heavily, one hand supporting her lower back. Victoria noted the gesture but said nothing about it. Instead, she waited while her daughter and son-in-law served themselves before taking a modest portion of pad thai. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the clink of utensils against ceramic plates and the occasional ping from Derek's phone. Finally, Cassandra put down her fork. So what's this about a $30,000 renovation? We never agreed to that. Victoria took a sip of water before responding. The garage is experiencing significant water intrusion. The inspector found evidence of improper conversion, inadequate insulation, and potential mold development. It's not a safe living environment. Derek looked up, frowning. It's just a small leak. I told you I'd look at it this weekend. With all due respect, Derek, Victoria said evenly, this requires professional assessment and remediation. The inspector documented substantial structural issues. Cassandra crossed her arms. And who's going to pay for this? We're already stretched thin with the nursery renovations and medical bills. Victoria opened her folder and removed the first document, a detailed assessment of the garage's condition, complete with photographs showing water damage to the ceiling, walls, and floor. I'm prepared to cover the cost, Victoria said, sliding the document across the table. But that's only part of what we need to discuss tonight. Cassandra barely glanced at the report before pushing it toward Derek. What else is there? Victoria extracted the next document, a copy of the original mortgage satisfaction letter showing the loan had been paid in full 3 years earlier. I recently learned that you've taken out a home equity loan against this property. The change in the room was immediate. Derek's phone went dark as he set it face down on the table. Cassandra's shoulders tensed, her chin lifting slightly in defiance. So? Cassandra challenged. We're on the deed. We needed the money for the renovations and the medical costs for the high-risk pregnancy. The financial advisor said it was the smartest option. Victoria remained calm, her voice level. The deed allows you to be a joint tenant, yes, but there are limitations you seem to have overlooked. She pulled out the deed itself, the highlighted sections glowing yellow against the white paper. Specifically, the clause requiring mutual consent for any encumbrance against the property. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Look, Victoria, we checked with the bank. They said Cassandra's name on the deed was enough. For their liability, perhaps, Victoria acknowledged, but not for the terms we agreed to when I added Cassandra to the deed. She placed another document on the table, the property agreement she and Cassandra had signed 5 years ago, witnessed by Victoria's attorney. Section 4. Paragraph B specifically requires written consent from all owners before securing any loan against the property. Cassandra's face flushed. This is ridiculous. You're trying to control us with legal technicalities because you don't like being in the garage. We needed that money, Mom. The twins are coming and this house wasn't ready. This isn't about control, Victoria corrected. It's about respect and honesty. You moved me to the garage without discussion. You've been renovating spaces I paid for without consultation. And you leveraged a property I worked 20 years to secure without my knowledge or consent. Derek was now reading the property agreement with growing concern. Cass, she's right. This clause is pretty clear. Cassandra shot him a look that could have frozen lava. Whose side are you on? I'm just saying, what exactly do you want, Mom? Cassandra interrupted, turning back to Victoria. Victoria extracted another document from her folder. This one, from Coastal Lending's legal department, received just that afternoon. There are several options. Coastal Lending has acknowledged that the loan was improperly secured without full owner consent. They've offered to rescind it, though that would require immediate repayment of the principal. The color drained from Cassandra's face. We can't repay it. We've already spent most of it on the renovations and the medical bills. The rest is going toward the nursery furnishings and Derek's car. Victoria nodded as if this response was expected. That's why I've proposed an alternative solution. I've offered to purchase the loan from Coastal Lending. Derek blinked. You want to buy our loan? Why would you do that? Because it provides me with certain advantages while allowing you to retain the capital you've already spent, Victoria explained. She slid another document across the table, a preliminary agreement from Coastal Lending outlining the terms of the transfer. However, as the new lender, I would be entitled to establish repayment terms. Cassandra's eyes narrowed. What kind of terms? Victoria pulled out the final document, a proposed repayment schedule she had drafted with her financial advisor. Double the current monthly payment with an accelerated principal reduction plan. Double? Cassandra's voice rose. That's insane. We can barely afford the payments now, perhaps, Victoria acknowledged. But there's a secondary option. She turned to a flagged page in the document. I'm prepared to maintain the original payment schedule under certain conditions. Derek leaned forward. What conditions? First, the immediate renovation of the garage into a proper living space, fully insulated, properly ventilated, with its own heating and cooling system, a proper bathroom, and appropriate accommodations. Cassandra started to protest, but Victoria continued. Second, restoration of my access to the main house, including the kitchen and living areas, without restriction. Derek nodded slowly, but Cassandra remained rigid. Third, Victoria continued, a formal acknowledgement that any future renovations or changes to the property require my written consent, as specified in the original deed agreement. The room fell silent. Cassandra stared at the document spread across the table, her expression a complex mixture of anger, embarrassment, and calculation. Derek was the first to speak. These seem like reasonable requests, Cass. We should have consulted her in the first place. Cassandra's jaw tightened. You don't understand. This is about control. It's always been about control with her. Victoria maintained her composure, though the accusation stung more than she would admit. This is about mutual respect, Cassandra. I welcomed you into my home when Derek lost his job last year. I added you to the deed to provide security for your future. I've paid the property taxes and insurance without complaint, and in return, you've made unilateral decisions about my living conditions and financial obligations." She gathered the documents back into a neat stack. "You have two choices. Accept my terms and continue with the original payment schedule, or prepare to make double payments beginning next month." Derek reached for the folder. "Can we review these properly before deciding?" "Of course," Victoria said, sliding the documents toward him. "You have until Friday to decide." Cassandra pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is emotional blackmail. You're punishing us because you don't like the changes we've made." Victoria stood as well, her movements measured and deliberate. "I'm establishing boundaries that should have existed from the beginning. The choice is yours." As she turned to leave, Victoria noticed a small box in the corner of the dining room, the one containing her service medals and commendations, including the Purple Heart and Bronze Star she'd received after the IED attack. The box had been haphazardly shoved behind a decorative plant, as if Cassandra couldn't bear to display it, but couldn't quite bring herself to discard it either. Victoria paused, then picked up the box. "I'll take this with me." Cassandra said nothing, her arms crossed protectively over her belly. Derek looked between the two women, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Victoria walked back to the garage apartment, the box of medals tucked under her arm. The rain had started again, drumming against the roof, but the towels she'd placed earlier had kept the new puddles contained. She set the box carefully on her small table and opened it, inspecting each medal and certificate to ensure they hadn't been damaged. Her phone rang. Maya Washington, her former JAG officer friend. "Did you do it?" Maya asked without preamble. "I presented the options," Victoria confirmed. "They have until Friday to decide." "And if they refuse?" Victoria looked around the garage apartment, at the water stains spreading across the ceiling, at the boxes of her life stacked against walls, at the single bed that made her back ache every morning. "They won't," she said with quiet certainty. "Cassandra knows a tactical advantage when she sees one. She learned that from me." After hanging up, Victoria opened her laptop and sent a brief email to the roofing company, confirming that she wished to proceed with the comprehensive renovation estimate. She copied Cassandra and Derek on the message. Then she opened another email, this one from a realtor in a neighboring town, showing a modest two-bedroom condominium in a veterans' preferred housing development. Victoria hadn't mentioned this option to Cassandra and Derek. Some strategic advantages were best kept in reserve. She clicked reply and typed, "Please schedule a viewing for next week. I'd like to explore all available options." A crack of thunder shook the garage and the power flickered briefly before steadying again. Victoria closed her laptop and sat in the dimness, listening to the storm. In the distance, she could hear raised voices from the main house, Cassandra and Derek disagreeing about something. Probably about her. Victoria didn't smile. But for the first time since being relegated to the garage, she felt something close to satisfaction. Not because she was causing her daughter distress, but because she was reclaiming something essential that had been taken from her: respect. She had survived worse conditions in the military. She had endured the loss of her leg and the death of her husband. She had raised a daughter alone while serving her country. She would survive this too, and perhaps, if Cassandra could see past her immediate frustration, they might forge a new understanding, one built on mutual respect rather than convenience. Victoria placed her medals back in their box and set it on the shelf above her bed. Tomorrow would bring either acceptance or resistance. She was prepared for either. The dining room had been transformed since Victoria last sat there. The oak table she'd purchased from a fellow veteran's estate sale had been replaced by a glass-topped monstrosity with chrome legs. The chairs, once comfortable Windsor-style wooden seats with cushions Victoria had sewn herself, were now sleek, minimalist pieces that looked better suited to a corporate boardroom than a family dinner. Cassandra was setting out takeout containers, When Victoria entered, Thai food from the place down the street that Victoria had introduced them to years ago. Derek was already seated, scrolling through his phone with the distracted air of someone who'd rather be elsewhere. "You're early," Cassandra said without looking up. It wasn't an accusation, but it wasn't a welcome either. Victoria placed her folder on the edge of the table and took a seat across from Derek. "Punctuality was drilled into me a long time ago." Derek glanced up, offered a weak smile, then returned to his phone. Cassandra finished arranging the food and sat down heavily, one hand supporting her lower back. Victoria noted the gesture, but said nothing about it. Instead, she waited while her daughter and son-in-law served themselves before taking a modest portion of pad thai. They ate in silence for several minutes, the only sounds the clink of utensils against ceramic plates and the occasional ping from Derek's phone. Finally, Cassandra put down her fork. "So what's this about a $30,000 renovation? We never agreed to that." Victoria took a sip of water before responding. "The garage is experiencing significant water intrusion. The inspector found evidence of improper conversion, inadequate insulation, and potential mold development. It's not a safe living environment." Derek looked up, frowning. "It's just a small leak. I told you I'd look at it this weekend." "With all due respect, Derek," Victoria said evenly, "this requires professional assessment and remediation. The inspector documented substantial structural issues." Cassandra crossed her arms. "And who's going to pay for this? We're already stretched thin with the nursery renovations and medical bills." Victoria opened her folder and removed the first document, a detailed assessment of the garage's condition, complete with photographs showing water damage to the ceiling, walls, and floor. "I'm prepared to cover the cost," Victoria said, sliding the document across the table. "But that's only part of what we need to discuss tonight." Cassandra barely glanced at the report before pushing it toward Derek. "What else is there?" Victoria extracted the next document, a copy of the original mortgage satisfaction letter showing the loan had been paid in full 3 years earlier. "I recently learned that you've taken out a home equity loan against this property." The change in the room was immediate. Derek's phone went dark as he set it face down on the table. Cassandra's shoulders tensed, her chin lifting slightly in defiance. "So?" Cassandra challenged. "We're on the deed. We needed the money for the renovations and the medical costs for the high-risk pregnancy." The financial advisor said it was the smartest option. Victoria remained calm, her voice level. "The deed allows you to be a joint tenant, yes. But there are limitations you seem to have overlooked." She pulled out the deed itself, the highlighted sections glowing yellow against the white paper. Specifically, the clause requiring mutual consent for any encumbrance against the property. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Look, Victoria, we checked with the bank. They said Cassandra's name on the deed was enough." "For their liability." "Perhaps," Victoria acknowledged, "but not for the terms we agreed to when I added Cassandra to the deed." She placed another document on the table, the property agreement she and Cassandra had signed 5 years ago, witnessed by Victoria's attorney. Section 4, Paragraph B specifically requires written consent from all owners before securing. "Any loan against the property?" Cassandra's face flushed. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to control us with legal technicalities because you don't like being in the garage. We needed that money, Mom. The twins are coming, and this house wasn't ready." "This isn't about control," Victoria corrected. "It's about respect and honesty. You moved me to the garage without discussion. You've been renovating spaces I paid for without consultation. And you leveraged a property I worked 20 years to secure, without my knowledge or consent." Derek was now reading the property agreement with growing concern. "Cass, she's right. This clause is pretty clear." Cassandra shot him a look that could have frozen lava. "Whose side are you on? I'm just saying." "What exactly do you want, Mom?" Cassandra interrupted, turning back to Victoria. Victoria extracted another document from her folder. "This one, from Coastal Lending's legal department received just that afternoon. There are several options. Coastal Lending has acknowledged that the loan was improperly secured without full owner consent. They've offered to rescind it, though that would require immediate repayment of the principal. The color drained from Cassandra's face. We can't repay it. We've already spent most of it on the renovations and the medical bills. The rest is going toward the nursery furnishings and Derek's car. Victoria nodded as if this response was expected. That's why I've proposed an alternative solution. I've offered to purchase the loan from Coastal Lending. Derek blinked. You want to buy our loan? Why would you do that? Because it provides me with certain advantages while allowing you to retain the capital you've already spent, Victoria explained. She slid another document across the table, a preliminary agreement from Coastal Lending outlining the terms of the transfer. However, as the new lender, I would be entitled to establish repayment terms. Cassandra's eyes narrowed. What kind of terms? Victoria pulled out the final document, a proposed repayment schedule she had drafted with her financial advisor. Double the current monthly payment with an accelerated principal reduction plan. Double? Cassandra's voice rose. That's insane. We can barely afford the payments now. Perhaps, Victoria acknowledged. But there's a secondary option. She turned to a flagged page in the document. I'm prepared to maintain the original payment schedule under certain conditions. Derek leaned forward. What conditions? First, the immediate renovation of the garage into a proper living space, fully insulated, properly ventilated, with its own heating and cooling system, a proper bathroom, and appropriate accommodations. Cassandra started to protest, but Victoria continued. Second, restoration of my access to the main house, including the kitchen and living areas, without restriction. Derek nodded slowly, but Cassandra remained rigid. Third, Victoria continued, a formal acknowledgement that any future renovations or changes to the property require my written consent, as specified in the original deed agreement. The room fell silent. Cassandra stared at the documents spread across the table, her expression a complex mixture of anger, embarrassment, and calculation. Derek was the first to speak. These seem like reasonable requests, Cass. We should have consulted her in the first place. Cassandra's jaw tightened. You don't understand. This is about control. It's always been about control with her. Victoria maintained her composure, though the accusations stung more than she would admit. This is about mutual respect, Cassandra. I welcomed you into my home when Derek lost his job last year. I added you to the deed to provide security for your future. I've paid the property taxes and insurance without complaint. And in return, you've made unilateral decisions about my living conditions and financial obligations. She gathered the documents back into a neat stack. You have two choices: accept my terms and continue with the original payment schedule, or prepare to make double payments beginning next month. Derek reached for the folder. Can we review these properly before deciding? Of course, Victoria said, sliding the documents toward him. You have until Friday to decide. Cassandra pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is emotional blackmail. You're punishing us because you don't like the changes we've made. Victoria stood as well, her movements measured and deliberate. I'm establishing boundaries that should have existed from the beginning. The choice is yours. As she turned to leave, Victoria noticed a small box in the corner of the dining room, the one containing her service medals and commendations, including the Purple Heart and Bronze Star she'd received after the IED attack. The box had been haphazardly shoved behind a decorative plant, as if Cassandra couldn't bear to display it, but couldn't quite bring herself to discard it either. Victoria paused, then picked up the box. I'll take this with me, Cassandra said. Nothing. Her arms crossed protectively over her belly. Derek looked between the two women, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Victoria walked back to the garage apartment, the box of medals tucked under her arm. The rain had started again, drumming against the roof, but the towels she'd placed earlier had kept the new puddles contained. She set the box carefully on her small table and opened it, inspecting each medal and certificate to ensure they hadn't been damaged. Her phone rang. Maya Washington, her former JAG officer friend. "Did you do it?" Maya asked without preamble. "I presented the options," Victoria confirmed. "They have until Friday to decide. And if they refuse?" Victoria looked around the garage apartment, at the water stains spreading across the ceiling, at the boxes of her life stacked against walls, at the single bed that made her back ache every morning. "They won't," she said with quiet certainty. "Cassandra knows a tactical advantage when she sees one. She learned that from me." After hanging up, Victoria opened her laptop and sent a brief email to the roofing company, confirming that she wished to proceed with the comprehensive renovation estimate. She copied Cassandra and Derek on the message. Then she opened another email, this one from a realtor in a neighboring town, showing a modest 2-bedroom condominium in a veterans' preferred housing development. Victoria hadn't mentioned this option to Cassandra and Derek. Some strategic advantages were best kept in reserve. She clicked reply and typed, "Please schedule a viewing for next week. I'd like to explore all available options." A crack of thunder shook the garage, and the power flickered briefly before steadying again. Victoria closed her laptop and sat in the dimness, listening to the storm. In the distance, she could hear raised voices from the main house, Cassandra and Derek disagreeing about something, probably about her. Victoria didn't smile, but for the first time since being relegated to the garage, she felt something close to satisfaction, not because she was causing her daughter distress, but because she was reclaiming something essential that had been taken from her: respect. She had survived worse conditions in the military. She had endured the loss of her leg and the death of her husband. She had raised a daughter alone while serving her country. She would survive this too, and perhaps, if Cassandra could see past her immediate frustration, they might forge a new understanding, one built on mutual respect rather than convenience. Victoria placed her medals back in their box and set it on the shelf above her bed. Tomorrow would bring either acceptance or resistance. She was prepared for either. Victoria woke before dawn, her internal clock still calibrated to military time despite years of civilian life. The garage was unusually quiet. The rain had stopped, but a new sound caught her attention. Or rather, the absence of a sound. The constant drip that had been her companion for days had ceased. She reached for her prosthetic, attaching it with practiced efficiency, and made her way to the corner, where water had been pooling. The towels were still damp, but no new moisture had accumulated. She looked up, expecting to see the telltale water stain growing across the ceiling, but instead found a makeshift patch, a piece of heavy plastic sheeting secured with what looked like roofing tar, a temporary fix but effective, and not her work. Victoria checked her phone. No messages from Cassandra or Derek, no explanation for the midnight repair. She ran a hand through her silver-streaked hair and prepared for her morning routine. 15 minutes of stretching, 30 push-ups, and a series of exercises designed to maintain mobility in her residual limb. By 6:30, she was dressed and making her way to the main house for coffee. The kitchen was empty, but a note sat propped against the espresso machine. Had early doctor appointment. Derek fixed leak temporarily. Keys to main house on hook if you need anything while we're gone. Back. This afternoon. See, Victoria stared at the note, processing the unexpected shift. Keys to the main house. Access restored, however, temporarily. She made her coffee and walked slowly through the first floor, noting the changes that had been made in her semi-exile. Family photos had been rearranged, most of Victoria's military service images removed, replaced by Cassandra and Derek's wedding photos and ultrasound printouts. The living room furniture had been repositioned to create space for a large playpen that hadn't been assembled yet. The walls had been repainted in what interior decorators probably called greige. that indeterminate color between gray and beige that signaled cautious modernity. Victoria paused at the hallway leading to the master bedroom, her former room. The door stood partially open, revealing a glimpse of the nursery conversion. She approached quietly, as if entering contested terrain. The crib dominated the center of the room, an elaborate white wooden structure with carved details and a canopy frame. Beside it stood a matching changing table and dresser set. The walls were painted a soft mint green, with a hand-painted mural of a forest scene spanning one wall. Victoria stood in the doorway, coffee cooling in her hand, and studied the room that had once been hers. The closet where her uniforms had hung now stored tiny clothes organized by size and color. The corner where her reading chair had sat now featured a glider rocker with plush cushions. The bookshelves that had held her military history collection and favorite novels now displayed children's books and stuffed animals. Something caught her eye. A small shadow box mounted on the wall near the crib. Inside, displayed with obvious care, was a set of military insignia pins. Her pins. The ones she had received upon commissioning. The unit crest she had worn in Afghanistan. The combat service identification badge she had earned. Victoria moved closer, examining the display. A small engraved plate at the bottom read, "Grandma's stars. May you reach for them, too." She hadn't expected this small acknowledgement of her service, this thread connecting her past to her grandchildren's future. Cassandra had placed it deliberately at eye level for someone seated in the glider chair. A visual reminder for late-night feedings and early morning lullabies. Victoria touched the frame lightly, then stepped back. She left the room as she had found it and returned to the kitchen, where she rinsed her cup and placed it in the dishwasher. Her phone chimed with an email notification, a message from Coastal Lending confirming their agreement to her terms for purchasing the loan. The process could be completed as early as next week if all parties consented. Victoria forwarded the email to her financial advisor with a brief note. Proceed as discussed. Then she returned to the garage apartment to prepare for her next move. At her small desk, Victoria opened her laptop and reviewed the documents she had assembled. The property deed and loan agreements were in order. The documentation of the garage's condition was comprehensive. The alternative housing options, including the veterans' condominium development, were ready as contingencies. She was organizing these materials when her phone rang. The screen displayed Cassandra. "Yes," Victoria answered, her tone neutral. "They moved up my appointment," Cassandra said without preamble. "The doctor says the twins might come earlier than expected. They want to monitor me more closely." Victoria noted the strain in her daughter's voice, the faint tremor that signaled fear. Beneath the practiced composure, "Are you all right?" A brief pause. "They're concerned about my blood pressure, and one of the babies is smaller than they'd like." Another pause. "I'm on limited activity starting today." Victoria processed this information, calculating its implications. "What does that mean practically?" "Bed rest, essentially. No lifting, no stairs unless absolutely necessary, no stress." Cassandra's laugh was brittle. "As if that's possible." Victoria kept her voice level. "What can I do?" The silence stretched longer this time. Finally, Cassandra spoke, her words coming in a rush. "We've looked at your proposal. Derek thinks we should accept your terms. I think he's right." Victoria allowed herself a moment before responding. "I see. But I have a counteroffer," Cassandra continued. "We'll accept the renovation of the garage and the formal acknowledgement about future changes. But instead of just restoring your access to the house, we'd like— I need— What do you need, Cassandra?" Victoria prompted gently. "I need help," Cassandra admitted, her voice suddenly small. "With the bed rest and then with the twins. Derek can't take much time off. Work, and we can't afford a full-time nurse. I was hoping you might consider moving back into the guest room instead of the garage. It would be easier for everyone." Victoria's grip tightened on the phone. The guest room, the one that had been hers until she'd been relocated to the garage, was now being offered back. Not as restitution, but as convenience, because they needed her. "I'll think about it," Victoria said finally. "Mom, please. I know things have been difficult. But this isn't just about me anymore. It's about your grandchildren." Victoria closed her eyes briefly. "I said I'll think about it. We can discuss it when you get home." After hanging up, Victoria sat motionless for several minutes, weighing her options. The tactical landscape had shifted. Cassandra's medical situation created both opportunity and obligation. As a soldier, Victoria had been trained to adapt to changing circumstances. As a mother, she had learned that some battles weren't worth winning if the cost was too high. She opened her email and began composing a message to her attorney. The loan purchase would proceed as planned, but the terms of repayment might need adjustment. Victoria outlined a modified agreement that incorporated Cassandra's counteroffer, while preserving the essential boundaries she had established. Her phone chimed again. Another email, this time from the roofing company confirming their schedule. They could begin work on the garage renovation next Monday. Victoria replied with her approval and a request for additional information about soundproofing options. If she was going to establish a permanent living space in the garage, she wanted it done properly. By mid-afternoon, Victoria had revised her strategy and prepared a new document outlining the terms of their arrangement. She printed it using the small portable printer she'd purchased after moving to the garage, another adaptation to changed circumstances. She heard Cassandra and Derek arrive home, their voices floating across the driveway through her partially open window. Derek was saying something about picking up prescriptions, while Cassandra's responses were too low to distinguish. Victoria gathered her papers and walked to the main house. She found Cassandra in the living room, reclining on the sofa with her feet elevated on pillows. Derek was nowhere to be seen. "He went to get my medications," Cassandra explained, noticing Victoria's glance around the room. "And some groceries." Victoria nodded and took a seat in the armchair across from her daughter. "How are you feeling?" Cassandra's hand moved to her belly in that protective gesture expectant mothers develop early. "Worried, tired. The doctor says if my blood pressure doesn't stabilize, they might need to take the babies early." Victoria studied her daughter's face, the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw. For a moment, she saw not the adult who had displaced her, but the little girl who had once crawled into her bed during thunderstorms, seeking safety. "I've considered your counteroffer," Victoria said, keeping her voice professional despite the emotional undertow. "I'm prepared to accept it with some modifications." She handed Cassandra the document she had prepared. "I will move back into the guest room temporarily until the twins are born, and you're recovered enough to manage without assistance. During that time, I'll help as needed with household tasks and later with childcare." Cassandra scanned the document, her expression cautious. "However," Victoria continued, "the garage renovation will proceed as planned. Once you're back on your feet, I'll relocate there permanently to a properly constructed independent living space. The loan transfer will also proceed, but I'm willing to maintain the original payment schedule as long as our agreement is honored." Cassandra looked up from the paper. "You're still planning to move to the garage, even after it's renovated?" "Yes," Victoria confirmed. "I've come to appreciate having my own space, but it needs to be a proper space, not an afterthought." Cassandra's eyes narrowed slightly. "And if we need help with the twins longer term?" "Then we'll renegotiate at that time," Victoria said evenly. "But it will be a negotiation, Cassandra, not a unilateral decision." Mother and daughter regarded each other across the coffee table, the document between them like a treaty between nations with a complicated history. "One more thing," Victoria added. "I saw the shadow box in the nursery, with my insignia." Cassandra's expression softened slightly. Dad always said those stars meant something important, that they represented responsibility and sacrifice. She looked down at her hands. I thought the babies should know where they came from. Who came? Before them? Victoria nodded once, acknowledging what remained unspoken between them. I'll help you upstairs. You should be resting properly, not on the couch. She stood and offered her hand to her daughter. After a moment's hesitation, Cassandra took it, allowing Victoria to help her to her feet. Together, they made their way slowly up the stairs to the master bedroom, Victoria's former room, where a hospital-grade wedge pillow had been arranged on the bed. As Cassandra settled against the pillows, Victoria noticed a photograph on the nightstand that hadn't been there before, Victoria in her dress uniform, standing beside Cassandra at her high school graduation, both of them smiling, both of them whole. I'll be downstairs if you need anything, Victoria said, turning to leave. Mom, Cassandra called after her. Thank you for the compromise. Victoria paused in the doorway. It's not a compromise, Cassandra. It's a strategic redeployment. For the first time in weeks, she saw her daughter smile, a real smile with a flash of recognition in her eyes. Roger that, Master Sergeant. 3 days into Cassandra's bed rest, the household had settled into a new routine. Victoria had moved her essential belongings into the guest room, now restored to something resembling its former state, though the walls remained the trendy light gray Cassandra had chosen during Victoria's exile to the garage. The single bed had been replaced by Victoria's queen-sized mattress from storage, and Derek had reluctantly carried up her reading chair from the garage. Victoria woke at 0500 hours each morning, as she had throughout her military career. She would complete her physical therapy exercises, shower, and prepare breakfast for the household before Derek left for work. By 07:30, she would bring Cassandra a tray with breakfast and her morning medications, help her to the bathroom if needed, and ensure she was comfortably settled with everything she might need within reach. The rest of the morning was usually Victoria's own. Time to coordinate with the contractors who were now actively renovating the garage apartment. Consult with her financial advisor about the loan purchase, now in its final stages, and maintain her connection to the veterans groups she volunteered with. Today, she sat at the kitchen table reviewing the detailed drawings the contractor had provided for the garage conversion. The plans showed a properly insulated living space with a full bathroom, kitchenette, separate bedroom, and small sitting area. The contractor had suggested skylights to increase natural light without sacrificing privacy, and Victoria had approved. The additional expense. Her phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Cassandra's asking for you. Victoria had insisted they maintain this formality. Cassandra was to text Derek, who would then relay the message to Victoria. It was a small thing, but it established a necessary boundary. Victoria was helping because she chose to, not because she was at her daughter's beck and call. She made her way upstairs, carrying a fresh glass of water and the book Cassandra had been reading. She found her daughter propped against the pillows, her laptop open beside her, a frown creasing her forehead. What's wrong? Victoria asked, setting the water on the nightstand. Cassandra gestured to the screen. The nursery furniture delivery is delayed. They're saying it won't arrive until after the twins are due. Her hand moved protectively to her belly. But if the doctor's right about them coming early... Victoria assessed the situation with practiced efficiency. What exactly is delayed? The cribs, the matching changing table, the dressers. Cassandra scrolled through the order details. Basically everything except the rocking chairs and the bedding. Victoria nodded once. May I? She asked, gesturing. To the laptop. Cassandra passed it over, and Victoria reviewed the order information. The furniture was coming from a boutique manufacturer in Vermont, known for handcrafted wooden pieces with 6-month lead times. Cassandra and Derek had ordered it shortly after learning they were having twins, but production delays had pushed the delivery date perilously close to Cassandra's due date. Now, with the possibility of an early delivery, they were facing a logistical problem. Have you considered alternatives? Victoria asked. Cassandra's shoulders slumped. We spent most of our savings on this set, and everything else in the nursery was chosen to match it. She bit her lip. I know it sounds frivolous, but I wanted everything to be perfect for them. Victoria recognized the emotion behind the words, the same drive for perfection she had once channeled into her military career, the same attention to detail she had brought to raising Cassandra as a single mother after her husband's death. May have a solution, Victoria said after a moment. Let me make a call. She stepped into the hallway and dialed a number from memory. Kevin? It's Victoria Rodriguez. Yes, it's been too long. Listen, I have a situation. Kevin Matthews had served under Victoria during her second tour in Iraq. After discharge, he had established a successful custom furniture business, specializing in rapid production of high-quality pieces for military families who often faced sudden relocations. His workshop was just 40 minutes away. When Victoria returned to the bedroom, Cassandra was scrolling through her phone, looking at backup options for baby furniture. Kevin can help, Victoria announced. He can create 2 cribs and a changing table within 2 weeks. They won't be exact matches for what you ordered, but they'll be well made and safe. And when your original order arrives, he'll take these pieces back as a trade-in towards something else you might need. Cassandra looked up, surprise evident in her expression. He can do that? That quickly? Victoria nodded. He's sending design options this afternoon. All you need to do is choose. Who? Is Kevin? A former staff sergeant from my unit. He makes furniture now. Victoria kept her explanation simple, though the reality was more complex. Kevin had struggled with severe PTSD after discharge. Victoria had helped him navigate the VA system, connect with therapy resources, and eventually secure a small business loan. His furniture business had become both his livelihood and his therapy. Thank you, Cassandra said softly, for fixing this. Victoria acknowledged the gratitude with a slight, I'm going back downstairs. The contractors need a decision on the flooring for the garage apartment. Cassandra's expression shifted. You're really going through with it? Moving back to the garage after the babies are born? A properly renovated garage apartment, Victoria corrected. And yes, we've discussed this. But why? You'll have the guest room. You could stay. Because I need my own space, Cassandra, Victoria interrupted, her tone firm but not unkind. Just as you needed yours when you decided to convert my bedroom into a nursery. Cassandra had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was different. We needed space for your growing family. Yes, I remember. Victoria's gaze was steady. And I need space for my continued independence. The difference is that I'm creating that space properly, not relegating you to an unsuitable environment. The words hung between them, direct, but not accusatory. Victoria had long ago learned that in both military and family matters, clarity was kindness. Cassandra looked down at her hands. I didn't think of it that way at the time. I know, Victoria said simply. Rest now. I'll bring lunch at noon. Downstairs, Victoria found Derek at the kitchen table, having returned home for lunch. He was reviewing the same floor plans Victoria had been studying earlier. These look good, he said, genuine appreciation in his voice. Better than what we did initially. Victoria poured herself a cup of coffee. That's because these were designed by professionals for long-term living, not hastily converted storage. Derek winced slightly. Yeah, about that. I want to apologize. The garage situation was a tactical error, Victoria supplied. One that's being corrected. Derek studied her for a moment. Cassandra says you've arranged for temporary baby furniture? Victoria nodded. It will be ready before the twins arrive, regardless of timing. Thank you. He hesitated. And the loan? Are you still? Yes, Victoria confirmed. The paperwork should be finalized tomorrow. I'll be your mortgage holder. By the end of the week. Derek's expression was a mixture of discomfort and resignation. And you're still planning to double the payments? Victoria sipped her coffee, regarding her son-in-law over the rim of the cup. That depends on whether the terms of our agreement are honored. They will be, Derek assured her quickly. The contractors are making good progress on the garage apartment, and Cassandra's agreed to the consultation requirement for future house changes. Victoria set down her cup. Then the original payment schedule will remain in effect. Relief washed over Derek's face. Thank you. With the medical bills and now, the temporary furniture. Have you received the hospital's estimate for the delivery? Victoria asked. Derek nodded grimly. This morning. Even with our insurance, we're looking at significant out-of-pocket costs, especially if they need time in the NICU. Victoria had anticipated this. Military planning always involved considering worst-case scenarios and preparing accordingly. I've spoken with my financial advisor, she said. I'm establishing a healthcare fund for the twins. It will cover any immediate medical needs and can be used for future healthcare expenses as well. Derek stared at her. But after everything, This isn't for you, Derek, Victoria interrupted. Or even for Cassandra. It's for my grandchildren. She reached for the folder beside her laptop and extracted a document. This outlines the terms. The fund will be administered by a trustee, in this case, my attorney. Medical expenses can be submitted directly to her office for payment. Derek scanned the document, his brow furrowing. This is generous, especially considering how we've treated you. It's practical, Victoria corrected. I won't have my grandchildren's care compromised because of financial concerns. What she didn't say was that she understood all too well the crushing weight of medical debt. After her husband's extended illness and death, Victoria had faced years of financial hardship while raising Cassandra alone. Her military benefits had helped, but the experience had taught her the importance of planning for healthcare emergencies. Derek signed the acknowledgement page and returned it to her. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Victoria replied, tucking the document back into her folder. Just ensure that Cassandra follows her doctor's orders. The best thing for those babies is to stay where they are as long as possible. As if on cue, Victoria's phone chimed with a text, a photo from Kevin showing preliminary sketches for the cribs. The designs were elegant but sturdy, with safety features that exceeded regulatory requirements. Victoria forwarded the image to Cassandra with a brief message. Options from Kevin. Let me know which you prefer. She returned to her coffee, aware of Derek watching her with a new expression. Something between respect and wariness. You've had this planned all along, haven't you? He asked finally. The loan purchase, the garage renovation, the healthcare fund. This wasn't a reaction to us moving you to the garage. This was a strategic response. Victoria allowed herself a small smile. In the military, we're taught to convert disadvantageous positions into advantageous ones. It's not about winning a single engagement. It's about securing the best possible long-term outcome. Derek shook his head slowly, a rueful smile forming. Remind me never to play chess with you. Too late, Victoria replied, rising from the table. We're already several moves in. The call came at 3:17 a.m., 3 weeks before Cassandra's scheduled C-section. Victoria was instantly alert, military training cutting through the fog of sleep as her phone vibrated on the nightstand. Derek's voice was tight with panic. Her water broke. The contractions are 5 minutes apart. The doctor says to come in now. Victoria was already moving, sliding her prosthetic into place with practiced efficiency. I'll drive. Be ready in 2 minutes. She dressed quickly, jeans, button-down shirt, comfortable shoes, and grabbed the emergency bag she'd prepared the week before. Inside was everything Cassandra might need for an unexpected hospital stay. Toiletries, comfortable clothing, the twins' coming-home outfits, and a folder containing all relevant medical information and insurance details. Derek met her in the hallway. his face pale under the dim lights. Cassandra was leaning heavily against the wall, her expression a mixture of pain and fear. "I can't be in labor," she said as Victoria approached. "It's too early. The nursery isn't ready. The furniture from Kevin isn't even—" "The babies decide their own timeline," Victoria interrupted gently. "Let's focus on getting you to the hospital safely." The drive was tense but efficient. Victoria navigated the empty pre-dawn streets with the same calm precision she had once used to maneuver military vehicles through far more dangerous terrain. In the back seat, Derek murmured encouragements to Cassandra while timing contractions on his phone. At the hospital, everything accelerated. The doctors confirmed that Cassandra was already 6 centimeters dilated, and the smaller twin was showing signs of distress. The decision for an emergency C-section was made within minutes. "Derek can come with me, right?" Cassandra asked the nurse, her voice thin with anxiety. "Of course," the nurse assured her. "Just one person in the operating room, though." Cassandra looked at Victoria, guilt flashing across her face. "Mom, I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," Victoria said firmly. "Derek should be with you. I'll be right here when you're done." As they wheeled Cassandra toward the operating room, Derek hung back for a moment. "What about the nursery? The cribs aren't ready, and we don't have—" "I'll handle it," Victoria promised. "Focus on Cassandra and the babies." After they disappeared through the double doors, Victoria found a quiet corner of the waiting room and made a series of calls. First to Kevin, explaining the emergency and requesting expedited completion of at least one crib. Then to Maya Washington, her attorney, activating the healthcare fund they had established. Finally, to Sergeant James, who now ran the local Veterans Support Network. "I need a team," Victoria explained, her voice steady despite the early hour. "Today, the mission is to prepare a nursery for premature twins." By the time the sun rose, Victoria had assembled what she privately thought of as her rapid response unit. Kevin had promised the first crib would be delivered by noon, with the second following the next day. Maya was already in contact with the hospital's financial department, and Sergeant James had mobilized 3 fellow veterans who specialized in precisely this kind of time-sensitive project: a former logistics officer, a construction specialist, and a medic with neonatal experience who could advise on the specific needs of premature infants. At 7:43 a.m., Derek emerged from the operating room, his face a complex mixture of exhaustion and wonder. "They're here, both girls, small but fighting." His voice caught. "They're in the NICU now. The doctors say they'll need to stay for at least 2 weeks, maybe longer." Victoria nodded, absorbing the information. "And Cassandra?" "Stable. Resting." Derek ran a hand through his hair. They had to give her additional medication during the procedure. There was more bleeding than they expected. Victoria processed this with the same calm assessment she had applied to battlefield updates. "She's in recovery now?" "Yes. They said we can see her in about an hour." Derek looked around, suddenly seeming lost. "I should call people, let them know." "I've already contacted the people who need to know immediately," Victoria assured him. "The rest can wait until you've seen Cassandra and the babies." Relief washed over Derek's face. "Thank you." Victoria handed him a protein bar and bottle of water from her emergency bag. "Eat something. It's going to be a long day." While Derek ate, Victoria sent a series of text updates to her response team. The 2-week NICU stay changed the timeline. They now had a small cushion to prepare the nursery. But it also meant additional medical expenses and specialized equipment needs for the premature twins. By mid-morning, Victoria had seen both Cassandra and her new granddaughters. Cassandra was drowsy but stable, her first question upon seeing Victoria a worried, "The nursery is being handled," Victoria assured her. "You focus on recovering. Everything else is under control." The twins, named Emma and Charlotte, were tiny but remarkably complete, each weighing just over 4 pounds. They lay in adjacent incubators, connected to monitors that tracked their breathing, heart rates, and oxygen levels. Despite their size, both showed surprising strength, their tiny fists occasionally clenching as if preparing for future battles. Victoria stood at the NICU window, studying their features with careful attention. Emma had Cassandra's determined chin. Charlotte had what looked like the beginnings of Victoria's own high cheekbones. Neither resembled Derek particularly, a fact Victoria filed away without comment. She was still observing them when the NICU nurse approached. "Are you grandmother?" Victoria nodded once, the title feeling both strange and oddly right. "They're fighters," the nurse said with approval. "Especially the smaller one. Charlotte, right? She's got quite a grip for someone so tiny." Victoria felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest. "Military blood," she said simply. The nurse smiled. "That explains it. Will you be involved in their care once they're discharged?" "Yes," Victoria confirmed. "I'm overseeing the preparation of their home environment." This was an understatement. By the time Victoria left the hospital at noon, leaving Derek to alternate between Cassandra's recovery room and the NICU, her response team was all ready, transforming the house. Kevin had arrived with the first crib, an elegantly simple design in maple with safety features that exceeded hospital standards. Sergeant James and his team had rearranged the nursery to accommodate the specialized equipment the NICU nurse had recommended. The former medic was creating a sterilization station for the medical supplies the twins would need during their first weeks home. Victoria supervised the operation with quiet efficiency, making decisions without hesitation when needed. The changing table was positioned for optimal access during night feedings. The rocking chairs were placed to catch natural light during the day, but away from drafts near the windows. The medical supplies were organized in a logical system that even a sleep-deprived parent could navigate. By evening, the nursery had been transformed from a Pinterest-inspired showcase to a functional space designed for the specific needs of premature infants. The decorative elements remained: the forest mural, the soft mint green walls, the shadow box containing Victoria's military insignia, but they now framed a room equipped for the real challenges ahead. Victoria stood in the doorway, mentally checking her list. The first crib was assembled and positioned. The second would arrive tomorrow. The medic had created detailed instructions for the operation of the specialized equipment. The monitors were installed and tested. The supplies were categorized and labeled. Her phone chimed with a text from Derek. "Doctor says Cassandra can come home in 3 days if recovery continues well. Twins still estimated 2 weeks minimum in NICU." Victoria acknowledged the message, then made her way downstairs. In the kitchen, Sergeant James was preparing several days' worth of meals that could be easily reheated. The logistics officer was creating a schedule for the rotation of volunteers who would help during the first weeks after the twins came home. "Master Sergeant," James said as Victoria entered, automatically falling into the habit of military address. "The nursery is at approximately 90% readiness. We should complete the remaining tasks by 0800 tomorrow." Victoria nodded. "Excellent work. The timeline has been updated. Mother returning home in 3 days. Infants approximately 2 weeks later." James made a note on his tablet. "We'll adjust accordingly. Do you require anything else for tonight?" Victoria considered the question. "No. You and your team should get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll finalize the preparations and begin establishing the rotation schedule for post-discharge support." After James and his team departed, Victoria toured the house one more time, verifying that everything was in order. The contractors, working on the garage apartment, had made significant progress during the day, despite the chaos of the nursery preparations. The insulation was complete, the drywall hung, the electrical work finished. The space was beginning to look like a proper living area rather than a makeshift conversion. Victoria stood in what would become her kitchenette, running her hand along the partially installed countertop. The contractors had asked if she wanted to pause the renovation given the early arrival of the twins, but she had declined. The work would continue as planned. Her boundaries would remain intact, even as she stepped up to support her daughter and grandchildren. In the main house, she prepared a simple dinner for herself, then settled in the living room with her laptop. She had emails to send, arrangements to make, contingencies to plan for. The twins' early arrival had accelerated her timeline, but the fundamental strategy remained unchanged. As she worked, Victoria occasionally glanced toward the stairs leading to the nursery. From her position, she could see the soft nightlight glowing in the hallway, illuminating the path to the room that had once been hers. The room that would now belong to Emma and Charlotte. She felt no resentment at this thought. The space had been transformed with purpose now, not merely taken from her out of convenience. And when the twins eventually came home, they would arrive to an environment prepared with the same methodical care Victoria had once brought to military operations, organized, secure, ready for any contingency. Her phone chimed again. A photo. From Derek. Cassandra, pale but smiling weakly, reaching out to touch Charlotte's tiny hand through the incubator port. The caption read simply, "Your granddaughters can't wait to meet you properly." Victoria studied the image carefully. Then, with a precision born of decades of military discipline, she allowed herself a single, measured smile. 6 months had passed since the twins' birth. The seasons had changed, summer heat giving way to autumn crispness, and the household had settled into a new rhythm, chaotic but functional, exhausting but purposeful. Victoria stood in the doorway of her completed apartment, surveying the transformation. What had once been a makeshift living space with a leaking roof and inadequate insulation was now a fully equipped private residence. The concrete floor had been covered with warm bamboo planking. The walls were properly insulated and painted, a soft ivory that reminded her of the desert sunrises she'd witnessed during her deployments. The kitchenette gleamed with compact stainless steel appliances, and the bathroom featured a walk-in shower with grab bars, a practical accommodation for her prosthetic leg. Her military efficiency was evident in every aspect of the space. Books were arranged by category and author on built-in shelves. Her service medals and commendations, once hidden away in boxes, were now displayed in a custom cabinet with glass doors. Her desk faced the window that overlooked the garden, positioned to catch the morning light but avoid afternoon glare on her computer screen. The space was unmistakably hers, not an afterthought or a compromise, but a deliberate creation reflecting her identity and needs. The contractors had completed the work 2 months ago, exactly on schedule, despite the chaos that had accompanied the twins' arrival. Yet Victoria had not moved in. Her phone chimed with a text from Derek. Heading to work. Now, both babies finally asleep. Cassandra in shower. Thanks again for last night. Victoria texted back a simple acknowledgement. She had taken the nighttime feeding shift, allowing Cassandra and Derek a few precious hours of uninterrupted sleep. It had become part of her routine, handling the 2 a.m. bottles while the exhausted parents rested. The twins were still not sleeping through the night, and Charlotte's reflux issues meant someone needed to keep her upright for at least 30 minutes after each feeding. She gathered her coffee mug and the novel she'd been reading in spare moments and made her way to the main house. Inside, the evidence of new parenthood was everywhere. Burp cloths draped over chair backs, a baby swing occupying the center of the living room, bottles in various stages of assembly lined up on the kitchen counter. Victoria moved through the space with practiced efficiency, loading the dishwasher with yesterday's bottles, wiping down countertops, and preparing a fresh pot of coffee. She heard the shower shut off upstairs and Cassandra's footsteps moving toward the nursery, likely checking that the twins were still asleep. A few minutes later, Cassandra appeared in the kitchen doorway, hair still damp, dressed in comfortable leggings and an oversized sweatshirt. The physical signs of her difficult delivery had faded, but the shadows under her eyes spoke of the ongoing challenges of caring for premature twins. You didn't have to clean up, Cassandra said, accepting the mug of coffee Victoria handed her. It was efficient to do it while making my own coffee, Victoria replied with a slight shrug. Cassandra smiled tiredly. Always tactical. They sat at the kitchen island in companionable silence, both women savoring the rare quiet moment. Through the baby monitor on the counter, they could hear the soft, snuffling sounds of the twins sleeping. The contractor says, "Your apartment is completely finished now," Cassandra said finally. "Has been for weeks," Victoria nodded. "Yes, all specifications met or exceeded. But you haven't moved in." Victoria took a sip of her coffee, considering her response. The current arrangement is more practical while the twins require night feedings. Cassandra studied her mother's face. "Is that the only reason?" Victoria met her daughter's gaze. "The decision is tactical, not emotional." "Mom." Cassandra set down her mug. "We need to talk about what happened. About how Derek and I treated you. About the garage." Victoria remained still, neither encouraging nor discouraging the conversation. "I've been thinking about it a lot," Cassandra continued. "Especially at 3 a.m. when I'm feeding the girls, about how we just took your space, how we pushed you out without really considering what it meant." She paused. "How I treated the woman who raised me alone after Dad died." Victoria's expression remained neutral, but she was listening intently. "We were selfish," Cassandra admitted. "We saw what we needed and took it, without considering what you needed. Without respecting that this was your home first." Her voice caught slightly. "Without honoring everything you sacrificed to give me a secure place to grow up." Victoria set her mug down carefully. "You were preparing for your children. That's natural." "No." Cassandra shook her head firmly. "Don't make excuses for us. What we did wasn't just preparing for the twins, it was entitlement. We assumed your needs were less important than ours." She reached across the counter and did something she hadn't done in years. She placed her hand on top of her mother's. "I'm sorry, Mom. Truly sorry." Victoria looked down at their hands, Cassandra's soft and slightly puffy from pregnancy hormones, her own weathered and strong from decades of service and survival. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with military precision, she turned her hand to clasp her daughter's. "Acknowledged," she said simply. Cassandra gave a watery laugh. "That's it? Just acknowledged?" Victoria's mouth curved in the slight smile that, for her, represented significant emotion. In the military, a sincere acknowledgement of error is more valuable than an elaborate apology. Through the baby monitor, Charlotte began to fuss. Both women listened, waiting to see if it would escalate to full crying or settle back into sleep. After a moment, the baby quieted. "I've been thinking," Cassandra said, returning to their conversation, "about your apartment and the mortgage arrangement." Victoria raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I know you purchased our loan to establish boundaries we should have respected from the beginning, and the original payment schedule was your compromise." Cassandra took a deep breath. "But I'd like to propose a formal amendment to our agreement." "What type of amendment?" Victoria asked, her tone professionally curious. Cassandra reached behind her and pulled a folder from the counter, similar to the one Victoria had presented months ago when outlining her terms. "Derek and I have discussed this extensively. We want to formally recognize your right to remain in the guest room as long as you wish, while maintaining your separate apartment for privacy when you need it." She opened the folder and slid a document across the counter. "This acknowledges your dual living arrangement as a permanent right, not a temporary accommodation while we need help with the twins." Victoria scanned the document, noting the legal language that mirrored her own previous terms. "This is comprehensive," she observed. "Maya helped draft it," Cassandra admitted. "I wanted to make sure it was as precisely worded as your original agreement." Victoria nodded in approval. Maya Washington's involvement explained the document's military-style clarity. "There's one more thing," Cassandra continued, extracting another document from the folder. "We'd like to formally add your name back to the property deed, not as a joint tenant, but as the primary owner with right of survivorship." Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly, the equivalent of significant surprise for someone with her controlled demeanor. "That's unnecessary. The current arrangement is sufficient." "It's not about necessity," Cassandra insisted. "It's about recognition. This house exists because of you. Your service, your sacrifice, your planning." She slid the document forward. "We want the legal reality to reflect that truth." Victoria studied her daughter's face, searching for signs of manipulation or hidden motives. She found none. Only sincerity and a new maturity that parenthood had accelerated. "And the mortgage?" Victoria asked, practical as always. "Remains with you as the holder," Cassandra confirmed. "We'll continue the original payment schedule as agreed, but we'd like to add a clause recognizing that in case of financial hardship, we would have the option to provide additional support for the twins in lieu of increased payments." Victoria allowed herself a small nod of appreciation. It was a tactically sound proposal, acknowledging both her authority and creating flexibility for future contingencies. From upstairs, Emma began to cry in earnest, her wails quickly joined by Charlotte's. Cassandra sighed and stood. "Duty calls. I'll take Charlotte," Victoria said, rising as well. "You handle Emma." Together they climbed the stairs to the nursery, the room that had once been Victoria's, then became the flashpoint of their conflict, and now served as the center of their shared purpose. The twins were fully awake now, tiny faces scrunched, in hunger and discomfort. Victoria lifted Charlotte with practiced ease, supporting her head and speaking in the calm, measured tone that seemed to soothe the more temperamental twin. "Good morning, Lieutenant," she said seriously. "Situation?" "Report!" Charlotte's cries subsided slightly as she focused on Victoria's face. Beside them, Cassandra lifted Emma, hiding a smile at her mother's military address. As they changed diapers and prepared for the morning feeding, Victoria considered Cassandra's proposal. The legal recognition was comprehensive, the terms favorable. But more important than the documents was the understanding behind them, the acknowledgement of her place in this home and in her grandchildren's lives. "I accept your proposed amendment," Victoria said as they settled into the rocking chairs, each with a baby and bottle in position. "With one condition." Cassandra looked up. "What condition?" "The apartment remains exclusively mine. No storage, no repurposing if I'm away. No assumptions about its eventual use." Victoria's gaze was steady. "Some boundaries remain non-negotiable." Cassandra nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely. We've learned that lesson." As they fed the twins in companionable silence, Victoria allowed herself to fully acknowledge what she had known for months, but had been reluctant to admit. She would not be moving permanently to the garage apartment. Not because it wasn't ready, or because the twins needed her, but because she had found an unexpected peace in this new arrangement. Independence without isolation, boundaries without exile. She looked down at Charlotte, whose tiny hand had wrapped around Victoria's finger with surprising strength. The infant's eyes, still blue but darkening toward Victoria's own brown, gazed up with solemn curiosity. "You're going to be trouble," Victoria informed her granddaughter seriously. "I recognize the tactical intelligence in those eyes." Cassandra laughed softly. "She gets that from you, not me. I never had your strategic mind." "You're developing it," Victoria observed. "Parenthood requires tactical thinking. And reinforcements," Cassandra added, glancing at her mother with newfound appreciation. Later that afternoon, while both twins napped and Cassandra caught up on much-needed sleep, Victoria sat at the kitchen table finishing the paperwork that would formalize their New arrangement. As she signed the final document, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from the indignity of being relegated to a leaking garage to the strategic counter-move of purchasing the mortgage, from establishing boundaries through legal means to finding a new balance based on mutual respect and shared purpose. She had not doubled their payments in the end, though she had maintained the right to do so if necessary. The threat had served its purpose, forcing recognition and respect for her position. Now a more nuanced arrangement had emerged, one that acknowledged both her authority and their interdependence. Victoria gathered the signed documents and placed them in her folder. Then she took out her phone and sent a brief message to Maya Washington. Amendment accepted with one additional condition. Final documents ready for review. Maya's response came quickly. Excellent tactical resolution. Will file once reviewed. Victoria smiled slightly at the military phrasing. Once a JAG officer, always a JAG officer. She put away her phone and walked to the living room window, looking out at the garage apartment. The space was beautiful, functional, and completely hers. She would use it often, for privacy, for the quiet moments she needed after decades of military discipline and service. But it would no longer be an exile or a last resort. She had reclaimed more than property rights. She had reclaimed her place in her family's life, not through concession or convenience, but through strategic resolve and clear boundaries. From upstairs came the first stirrings of a waking baby. Victoria turned from the window and moved toward the stairs with purpose. The master sergeant was needed on the front lines. They made me sleep in the garage. I built myself an apartment and bought their mortgage. Now we share a home on my terms. Hey, if you've enjoyed this story of resilience, strategy, and family redemption, please hit that subscribe button and join our community. Share in the comments if you've ever had to establish boundaries with family or reclaim your place after being sidelined. Remember, sometimes the best response isn't anger. It's a carefully executed plan. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.